Caleb had lived in the mountains long enough to understand when trouble was coming. That afternoon, the sky had turned dark in an unusual way. It's not just with ordinary rain clouds, but with heavy layers of storm clouds rolling fast from the high peaks. The air smelled sharp, like wet pine and cold earth. He stood outside his small cabin, stacking the last pieces of split firewood against the wall, hoping he had enough for a long night. The nearest town was almost an hour away on foot, and once the storm hit, the rough trail would turn slippery and dangerous. He wiped sweat from his forehead, even though the air was getting colder by the minute. Life alone in the mountains was hard work, but he preferred it this way. Since his father passed away, he had found comfort in quiet places where the wind could speak louder than people. The little cabin, built by his father years ago, felt like the only place where his thoughts settled as he pushed the final log into place. A strong gust of wind swept through the clearing, bending the tall pines. Caleb looked up, sensing the storm's urgency. There was something different in the air, a louder silence, a strange tightening in nature. He turned toward the cabin and decided it was time to go inside before the rain arrived. The moment he reached the door, froze. There was a sound very soft, like knuckles tapping weakly. Caleb frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Hardly anyone ever came this far unless they were lost. He placed his hand on the wooden door and waited. The knock came again. Light, hesitant. He slowly opened it. Standing outside in the rain-filled wind was a young Apache woman. Her long, dark hair was wet and clinging to her shoulders. A traditional woven shawl, heavy with water, wrapped tightly around her upper body. She looked tired, cold, and slightly breathless, as if she had been walking through the storm for a long time. For a second, they simply looked at each other. Her dark eyes held both caution and hope. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked slowly, not wanting to frighten her. She nodded once. "My name is Nayeli," she said softly. "I need shelter. The storm caught me far from my people." Her voice trembled, not from fear but from cold. She clutched her shawl closer, though it was soaked through. Caleb stepped aside immediately. "Come in, please." Nayeli entered without hesitation, which surprised him. Most strangers in the mountains took a moment to judge a situation before trusting someone's home. But perhaps the storm had left her no choice. Once she was inside, Caleb shut the door firmly to keep out the wind. The cabin was warm, with a fire already burning in the stone fireplace. A pot of tea sat heating near the flames, filling the air with a gentle scent of herbs. Nayeli stood near the door, water dripping slowly from the edges of her shawl onto the wooden floor. She looked around with careful eyes, studying the walls, the shelves, the tools hanging neatly by the window. Finally, she looked at Caleb again, but this time with a question that seemed to rise from deep inside her. "Are we alone here?" Her voice was calm but serious. Caleb blinked. "Yes, just me." She took a slow breath, as if that answer mattered greatly. Something in her expression softened, though she still held herself in a guarded way. "Thank you," she murmured. Caleb motioned toward the fire. "You must be freezing. Please sit near the heat. I can make fresh tea." Nayeli walked closer to the fireplace with careful steps, as though she didn't want to trouble anything inside the cabin. She knelt near the flames, holding her hands out. The light reflected off her face, showing how pale she had become from the cold. Caleb brought her a tin cup of warm tea. She accepted it with quiet gratitude, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled gently, and the storm thundered outside, shaking the cabin walls. Rain struck the roof in heavy sheets. Nayeli's shawl was still dripping water onto the floor. She finally looked down at it and gave a slight, embarrassed smile. "My shawl. It is wet to the center," she said. "If I keep it on, I will not warm up." Caleb nodded quickly. "You can dry it by the fire. Here, let me make some space." But instead of handing it to him, she hesitated. She looked around again, making absolutely sure they were alone. After confirming it with her own eyes, she slowly began untying the knot of her shawl. Caleb instantly turned his face away, staring at the wall. He lifted one hand slightly. I'm not looking, don't worry. Just do what you need to stay warm. Nayeli gave a small chuckle at his reaction, a gentle sound that eased the tension. It is all right, she said. You show respect. That means more than you know. She slipped the heavy, wet shawl off her shoulders. The soft rustling of fabric told Caleb she was placing it carefully near the fire to dry. Her movement seemed practiced, almost ceremonial, as though her grandmother had taught her the exact way the shawl should be placed to avoid damage. Once she finished, she wrapped herself in the blanket he handed her. Caleb glanced over briefly, only when he knew she was covered. You look tired, he said. How far did you walk? A long way, she replied quietly. I was tracking one of our horses. A young one. It slipped away during the morning. My family spread out to search. I followed the tracks, but the storm came too fast. The wind covered everything, and I became lost. She sipped her tea slowly, letting warmth return to her body. Caleb sat on the chair across from her. You're safe now. You can rest here until the storm passes, she nodded gratefully, watching the flames as if they were the most comforting thing in the world. After a moment, Nayeli turned toward him again, studying his face. You live alone? Yes, Caleb said. Been here for almost 3 years. Why so far from others? She asked. Caleb took a slow breath. It's peaceful. After my father passed away, I needed time to heal. The mountains help. They don't ask for anything. They just let you breathe. Nayeli listened intently, her eyes soft with understanding. My people say, the mountains hold memory. They hear every story and keep it safe. Maybe they heard yours too. Her words surprised him. There was something honest about the way she spoke. Something rooted in old traditions and deep beliefs. Thunder boomed loudly overhead. The cabin shook again. Nayeli wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. My grandmother always told me never to stay wrapped in a wet shawl in a storm, she said quietly. Cold water steals strength. I did not want to disrespect your home by leaving water everywhere, but I had no choice. You don't need to worry, Caleb said. My home is simple. It can handle a little water. She smiled at that, a gentle, genuine smile that made her look less like a stranger and more like someone who belonged in the warmth. Of the room outside, the storm grew even stronger. Rain hammered the roof, wind whistled through the trees, and thunder rolled closer. You would never have reached your people in this weather, Caleb said softly. I know, she answered. That is why I asked if we were alone. I did not want anyone else to think I brought danger. He raised an eyebrow. Danger? She hesitated before speaking. Sometimes people misunderstand when an Apache woman arrives at someone's door alone. Some think we bring trouble. Others think we need to be handled like a problem. I wanted to be sure you did not have someone here who would judge me before hearing my words. Caleb shook his head. You don't have to worry about that. Her shoulders relaxed at his reassurance. The firelight glowed warmly across the room, giving the cabin a peaceful feeling despite the storm outside. Caleb poured more tea for both of them. Nayeli thanked him again, her voice softer now. As though the warmth was finally reaching her bones, she looked at him curiously. Do you often help strangers? No, Caleb said honestly. Not many come this way. But you knocked, and you looked like you needed help. Nayeli took a slow breath, letting the heat from the fire wash over her. In my culture, when someone opens their home to a traveler, it is an act of honor. I will remember this. Caleb nodded, unsure what to say. Her words felt larger than the moment, carrying weight he didn't fully understand. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. When the storm is gone, may I look for my horse with your help? You know this land better than I do. Course, Caleb said. We can start at sunrise. Nayeli smiled again, this time in relief. Thank you. For the rest of the evening, they talked softly about simple things, how she learned to track, how he learned to repair tools, how both of them preferred quiet over noise. Bit by bit, the tension faded. The cabin felt less like a place of survival, and more like a small island of peace inside the wild storm. Outside, lightning flashed, painting the pines in white light. The thunder followed seconds later. Rain washed down the windows in long streaks. Inside, the warm fire reflected in their eyes. Naili sat quietly, wrapped in the blanket, watching her shawl slowly dry. Caleb watched the flames, listening to the storm and to her steady breathing beside him, to strangers. Trapped together by weather and chance, slowly learning to trust the calmness in each other's presence. The night deepened, and the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, a strange sense of safety grew soft, gentle, and real. The storm continued deep into the night, but inside the cabin, the fire gave enough warmth for both Caleb and Naeli to feel safe. As the wind howled louder, Caleb added another log to the flames, and sparks lifted gently into the chimney. The room glowed with a soft, steady light. Naeli sat wrapped in the blanket he had given her, her wet shawl drying slowly on the chair near the fire. For a long time they both stayed quiet, listening to the storm's wild voice. It was strange how silence between strangers could feel calm instead of uncomfortable. Naeli seemed deep in thought, her eyes fixed on the fire as if reading stories from the flames. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft. "You are not afraid to live alone here?" Caleb shook his head. "Not really. The mountains are kind to people who respect them. They remind you to stay humble." Naeli nodded. "My grandmother says the same. She says the land listens. If you treat it well, it gives you strength. If you ignore it, it will remind you of your mistakes." Caleb smiled politely. "Your grandmother sounds wise." "She is," Naeli said with quiet pride. "She taught me how to track, how to read the wind, how to listen to the ground. She says everything speaks if you know how to hear it." She placed her cup down and pulled the blanket a little tighter around herself. Caleb noticed her hair was still damp, strands sticking gently to her cheeks. "Would you like a towel?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." He fetched one from the shelf and handed it to her. She dried her hair slowly, careful with each movement. Caleb tried not to stare, but there was something peaceful about the way she moved slow, steady, respectful of the small space they shared. After drying her hair, she placed the towel neatly on the arm of the chair. She sat straighter and looked at him with thoughtful eyes. "You live here alone," she said again, "but I can see your heart is full. You have memories in this place." Caleb paused. No one usually spoke to him about his inner life. Most people from town just bought supplies and left. He wasn't used to being seen so clearly. "My father built this cabin," he said quietly. "I grew up helping him cut wood and fix the roof. This place holds a lot of my childhood. After he passed away, it felt wrong to leave it behind." Naeli listened, as if every word mattered. "His memory stays in the walls," she said softly. "In the way you keep the firewood stacked, in the tools you keep sharp. You honor him by living here." Caleb didn't expect her words to warm him more than the fire did, but they did. A loud crash outside interrupted their quiet talk. Nael's head snapped toward the door immediately, her tracking instincts rising. "That sound," she whispered. "It was heavy. Maybe a tree fell." Caleb stood. "Let me check." "No," she said quickly. "Not alone. The storm is too strong. I will come with you." Caleb hesitated, but her expression was firm. She was used to the outdoors in ways few people were. He nodded and grabbed a lantern from the shelf. The flame inside flickered when he opened the door. Rain soaked them instantly. The wind nearly snatched the lantern from his hand. Naeli leaned close to him so she could see the area ahead. Together, they scanned the small clearing in front of the cabin, near the edge of the trees. A heavy branch had crashed to the ground. "It is just a branch," Naeli said, squinting through the rain. "But it fell close to your cabin. Maybe the storm is pulling at the older trees." Caleb nodded. "We'll have to clear it tomorrow." They stepped back inside quickly, closing the door against another blast of wind. Their clothes were wet again, though not as badly as before. Naeli laughed softly, not a cheerful laugh, but one filled with the strange relief of surviving something powerful. "The storm is testing us," she said. Caleb grinned. "And we're still standing." They dried off again near the fire. The simple effort of stepping outside together had somehow brought them closer. There was something about facing nature as a team, even for a few moments, that connected people across different worlds. After settling again, Nayeli watched her shawl drying. The edges were no longer dripping, and the bright woven patterns slowly regained their shape. My grandmother made this for me, she explained. Each color has meaning. Red for courage, blue for calm, yellow for hope. Caleb studied it with respect. It's beautiful work. It holds memory too, she said with a gentle smile. And warmth that comes from love. Caleb nodded. You'll need it dry for tomorrow. Nayeli's expression shifted. Her earlier calmness faded slightly as she remembered her lost horse. She looked at the window where rain streaked down in long lines. I hope the horse is safe, she whispered. He is young. Easily frightened. He was born last spring. Caleb leaned forward. We'll find him. First thing in the morning, she met his eyes, and something steady passed between them. Trust, maybe. Gratitude, or something simpler belief that she wasn't alone in this search anymore. The fire crackled, filling the silence again. After a while, Caleb stood and poured the last of the tea into her cup. She accepted it gratefully. The warmth from the drink softened her expression. You do not ask many questions, she said after a long pause. Most people ask things quickly when they meet someone like me. What kind of questions? Questions about where I came from, who my family is, what my tribe does. Things that feel like being examined. She looked toward the fire. You give space. It is. Respectful. Caleb shook his head gently. You came here in a storm? You were cold. That's what mattered. Her eyes held him for a moment longer before she looked away again. Time passed slowly, but comfortably. The storm eased little by little, though the wind still shook the trees. Nayeli shifted slightly in her seat and took a deep breath. Can I tell you something? She asked, of course. I asked earlier if we were alone, she began, not only because I was afraid of being judged. I also did not want anyone thinking I broke tradition. Caleb listened closely. In my culture, entering a man's home alone is delicate. It is not wrong, but it can be easily misunderstood. I did not want news to reach my family in a way that caused worry or shame. As she looked down at her hands. But the storm left me no choice. Caleb nodded slowly. You did what you had to do to stay safe. I understand. I hoped you would, she said quietly. Some people think too quickly. They see only what they want to see. Caleb didn't interrupt. He sensed she rarely spoke about such things. I do not know you well, she continued, but I felt you were. Steady. Calm. When you opened the door, you did not look at me with suspicion or with unkind eyes. That is why I trusted that I could stay. Her words surprised him. He never thought about the expression he wore when he opened the door. He was simply reacting to someone who needed help. You made the right choice, he said softly. You're safe here. Nayeli nodded. I know. She looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had carried a heavy worry for hours and finally set it down as the fire burned lower. Caleb stood to place another log inside. The crackling sound grew, sending warm light across Nayeli's face. She watched him quietly, as if studying the way he handled the wood, the way he kept the fire alive. You care for this place? She said. I try to, he replied, brushing with dust off his hands. It's home. She smiled slightly. I can see that. Her shawl was almost dry now. She touched it lightly, testing the fabric. By morning, it should be ready. Caleb nodded. You'll need it when we go out tracking. Yes, she said. Tracking becomes harder after heavy rain. The ground loses its signs. But if we look together, we have a better chance. We will find him, Caleb said again, confident without knowing why. Nayeli studied him with a thoughtful expression. You speak like someone who keeps promises. I try not to say things I can't do. Her eyes softened again. It is rare to meet someone who speaks that way. The storm outside slowly began to weaken. The thunder grew distant, the rain softened, and the wind became a gentle hum instead of a roar. The worst of the night had passed. Nayeli leaned back in the chair and let her eyes close for a moment. Fatigue finally settled in. The fire's warmth wrapped around her like a safe blanket. You should rest, Caleb said quietly. You've walked far. Be just a moment, she whispered. Her eyes remained closed. She didn't fall into deep sleep, but she rested enough for her breath to become slow and steady. Caleb didn't disturb her. He simply sat across from her. Listening to the fire and the soft patter of fading rain, eventually she opened her eyes again. Looking calmer than before, "You stayed awake," she said softly. "I didn't want you to wake up alone in a strange place." She smiled gently. "Thank you." Fire settled into glowing embers. Outside, the storm faded into a quiet drizzle. Nayeli adjusted the blanket one last time and looked at Caleb with a peaceful, trusting expression. "When morning comes, we will find the horse," she said. "And bring him home," Caleb added. She nodded. "Yes, bring him home." The night ended with quiet understanding between them, two strangers no longer separated by fear or distance, but linked by shared warmth, trust, and a promise waiting for sunrise. When the first light of morning touched the mountains, the storm had already faded into a soft mist. The air outside the cabin felt cool and fresh, carrying the smell of wet pine and damp earth. Caleb stepped out onto the small porch, stretching his arms as he breathed in the calm morning air. The night had been long, but the quiet sunrise felt like a promise that things would be easier now. Inside, Nayeli folded the blanket neatly and placed it back on the chair. Her shawl was dry, its woven colors bright again in the morning light. She draped it around her shoulders with care, almost like placing something sacred back where it belonged. She tightened the knot gently, her fingers moving with practiced familiarity. Caleb turned toward her. "Ready?" Nayeli nodded. "Yes, the storm washed away many signs, but the ground still remembers some things. We will follow whatever remains." Caleb grabbed his lantern, though he knew they wouldn't need it for long. It was more for comfort than anything else. He also picked up a small coil of rope and tied it to his belt. Nayeli saw the rope and gave a small, approving nod. "Good," she said. "A frightened horse sometimes needs gentle guidance." They started walking toward the edge of the clearing. The ground was soft and muddy from the rain. Every step left a fresh impression in the earth. Nayeli crouched near the first patch of flattened grass she saw. She touched it lightly with her fingertips. "He passed here yesterday," she said. "Before the heavy storm, maybe late afternoon." Caleb looked down but saw only grass. "How can you tell?" Nayeli smiled faintly. "The way the blades bend, the direction of the break. If it were older, the grass would have lifted by now. If it were newer, the ground would be more disturbed." She stood and walked slowly forward, letting her eyes scan the forest floor. Caleb followed closely, admiring the way she moved, steady. Confident in her reading of the land, they walked deeper into the woods, hearing birds stirring in the branches above. The storm had brought life back to the forest, and small drops of water still fell from the leaves, sparkling like tiny gems in the sunlight. After several minutes, Nayeli stopped again. "Look," she said quietly. "Hoof marks." Caleb knelt beside her. This time even he could see them, soft shapes pressed into the muddy soil. "But they're pointed in different directions," he said. "How do you know which way he went?" Nayeli studied the prints with sharp eyes. "These here," she pointed to one set, "are from yesterday before the storm. But these other ones are lighter. He stepped here after the rain softened the ground. That means he passed through again during the night." Caleb nodded. "So he's close." Nayeli stood slowly. "Yes, but he is frightened. We must be gentle." They continued following the trail, moving along a narrow path between tall trees. The morning sun began rising higher, warming the air slightly. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wet soil and fresh leaves. After nearly half an hour, they reached a small open area where the ground sloped gently downward toward a narrow gulch. The soil looked disturbed, and Nayeli's steps became more careful. "Something happened here," she whispered. Caleb scanned the area. "What do you see?" Nayeli walked forward slowly, her eyes shifting between the ground and the bushes. "Hoof marks. Many. And dragged prints." She pointed to deep lines in the mud. He slipped. He panicked. Caleb followed her gaze toward the edge of the gulch. Do you think he fell? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. If he had fallen, the marks would be sharp and the mud broken. But the lines show he struggled, not collapsed. She took a few more steps and stopped at the edge, looking down with worry. Caleb stood beside her and looked into the gulch. The narrow ditch stretched about 10 feet down, filled with rocks and small shrubs. But then he saw a movement, faint but there, a young brown horse. Trembling slightly, stood caught between thick branches of a fallen tree. One of its legs was stuck gently between two branches, not hurt, but held in place. The horse lifted its head nervously when it heard their voices. Nieli's face softened with relief. There he is, Caleb exhaled. He doesn't look injured. No, Nieli agreed. He is scared. The storm pushed trees down. He must have been searching for cover and slipped into the branches. Without waiting another moment, she started walking down the slope carefully. Caleb followed her, stepping slowly so they wouldn't scare the horse further. When they reached the bottom, Nieli approached the horse with calm, gentle movements, speaking softly in her language. Her voice sounded like a soothing melody, a sound that even the wind seemed to listen to. The horse's ears twitched toward her. Its trembling slowed. Caleb watched in quiet admiration. Nahel's presence was a kind of peace he rarely saw in people. She reached out slowly, letting the horse smell her hand. Only then did she touch its neck gently. It is all right, she whispered. We are here. Caleb moved behind the horse, checking the fallen branches. If we lift this part, he said, the leg should come free easily. Nieli nodded. We must lift gently. If he thinks he is trapped again, he will panic. Together, they positioned themselves carefully. Caleb braced his legs, gripping the heavier branch. Nieli placed her hands beneath the lighter one, supporting its weight. On 3, Caleb said. 1, 2, 3. They lifted the branches slowly. The horse shifted slightly, testing its leg. Nieli kept speaking in her calm voice, encouraging it with gentle words. The horse took a small step, then another. Finally, its leg came free. Caleb lowered the branch slowly, making sure nothing snapped loudly. The horse backed away a few steps and shook itself, relieved. Nieli held out her hand again. Good boy, she said softly. The horse nuzzled her palm, recognizing her scent. She smiled, and Caleb felt something warm lift inside him, relief. Pride and respect. You saved him, Caleb said quietly. No, Nieli replied. We did. They made their way out of the gulch, guiding the horse carefully up the slope. Caleb used the rope to secure a loose loop around the horse's neck. Not pulling, but just offering gentle direction whenever needed. Once they reached the open clearing, the horse began grazing peacefully, as if the entire night had not frightened him. Nieli stroked his neck again. He remembers home, she said. He will follow when we walk. Caleb wiped mud from his hands and took a long breath. I'm glad we found him before he wandered farther. So am I, Nieli said softly. They began walking back toward the cabin, the horse following at a steady pace. The rising sun warmed the forest, and the mist slowly lifted from the ground. Birds sang again. The storm felt like a distant memory. When they reached the cabin clearing, Caleb paused. You should rest before heading back to your people. Nieli looked at the cabin, then at him. You helped me more than I expected. I will not forget it. He shook his head. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said gently. Not everyone. She stepped closer, her shawl glowing softly in the sunlight. She reached to her wrist, where she wore a small woven bracelet made of red, yellow, and blue threads. With careful fingers, she untied it. Caleb blinked. What are you doing? It is tradition, she said. When someone shows kindness without asking for anything, we give them a symbol. A reminder that their actions are carried in our memory. She tied the bracelet gently around Caleb's wrist. Her fingers were warm from the sunlight, and her eyes were steady. This is for honor, she said, and gratitude. Caleb looked down at the bracelet, touched by the simple beauty of the gesture. Thank you, he said quietly. You earned it. she replied. They stood silently for a moment, listening to the soft wind passing through the trees. The horse grazed calmly near the cabin. After a while, she took the rope from him and looped it loosely around the horse again. My family will be worried. I must return. Caleb nodded. If you ever need help again, you know where to find me? A gentle smile lifted her lips. Yes, I know. She began walking toward the forest trail, guiding the horse beside her. After a few steps, she stopped and turned back. My family will come to thank you, she said. This is not the end. Caleb felt a warm spark of something he couldn't quite name. I'll be here. Naeli held his gaze for a long moment in unspoken understanding, passing between them before finally walking into the trees with the horse following close behind. Caleb stood outside the cabin long after she disappeared from sight. The bracelet on his wrist felt light but meaningful, as if it held a piece of her voice, her courage, and her trust. The storm had brought her to his door. The morning had taken her back home. But something in Caleb told him that their paths were not finished with each other, and deep in the forest, where sunlight touched the wet leaves, Naeli walked with a calm heart. Knowing she had met someone who would remain a part of her life long after the storm had passed,